and welcome to the SMART Recovery Podcast, where we offer thoughtful conversation about a variety of recovery topics. You'll hear self-empowering and science-based approaches to making changes toward a healthier and more satisfying lifestyle and building a life beyond addiction. Our mission is for every podcast to provide you with the information and resources you need to guide your own successful recovery journey. If you or someone you know needs addiction-related help, we encourage you to visit smartrecovery.org, where you will find practical tools, connections to support group meetings, and links for additional resources. Remember that the purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care from a doctor or other qualified addiction professionals. Before making any changes in your treatment plan, please discuss your thoughts with your medical provider. Now sit back and enjoy today's Smart Recovery Podcast.
Welcome to the Smart Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Frazier. Today on the podcast, we'll be talking with Dave Jansa. He's a Smart Recovery Facilitator in South Dakota, someone who has lived experience with the Family and Friends program, and a board member for an organization called Face It Together, which, as we'll learn, is a very close cousin of Smart Recovery. Dave Jansa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now let's start right out there with the fact that you have experience both as Smart Recovery Facilitator, but also let's back up. I know you have a history of peer recovery. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into that, some of your professional background?
Sure. I was a peer recovery coach from around 2010, 2011, on and off for about 10 years with that organization you mentioned before, Face It Together. Mm-hmm. And I'm a peer in that arena, struggled with addictive behaviors from age 16 to about 32. Mm-hmm. And like most people, and most people don't realize this, of course, like most people with addictive behaviors, I resolved them pretty much on my own, the assistance of a couple of brothers, and just a lot of awareness, coworkers, what they went through. I was able to, I guess, sort of just look around and see what people who had been, I'll say, drinking was just happened to be the drug of choice that was prevalent in my life and those around me. Seeing what many people in my life, in my close circle, had been like while drinking and in a problematic situation, and then afterwards, it just became apparent to me that I was very, very, very much like them, my two brothers specifically. Mm-hmm. And I went through the harm reduction and experimental phase, and finally came out on the other end realizing that abstinence was healthy and good and attainable and my way out. Mm-hmm.
Well, was this also through your discovery of Smart Recovery, or it's independent? I mean, it sounds like it was a self-empowering approach, which of course is a foundation of Smart Recovery, but was this without discovering Smart Recovery or after you had?
So this was prior to Smart Recovery, probably back in the early 90s. So Smart was probably just in somebody's idea stage at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's something that's quite, I guess, what's the kismet? Is that the right word? I mean, it's a connection you made with concepts. You talked about harm reduction. You talked about kind of the knowledge, asking yourself questions about, is this good for me, or others hearing or seeing you doing this, which again, kind of is the evolution of people's involvement with SMART, is asking themselves these questions and seeing if they can answer them in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. I was extremely curious and extremely confused about what I had gone through. Mm-hmm. I didn't go through what I thought was the portal, you might say, to being an addict or an alcoholic. If I remember asking a 12-step guy one time about my experience. I said, I quit drinking, my life transformed, I drank a lot, but I didn't go to AA, I never went to a meeting, I never went. He said, well, then you weren't an alcoholic. I was like, oh, okay. Then when Face It Together was formed in about 2009, 2010, we had a presentation by a really smart individual who said what I earlier said. Most people resolve their addictive behaviors without a formal intervention like AA or treatment or a counselor or some kind of huge cosmic event. They simply figure it out. And I thought, oh, so I did have addictive behaviors. I did have an addiction, and I'm not only I'm not an outlier. I'm part of the norm, you might say.
Okay.
It was a real pivotal moment for me in my construction of what I've learned about addiction and I learned about myself.
Sure. Well, there is the opposite side, if you will, or at least the corollary is for those that it does not resolve over time. Then programs like Smart Pathways, like SMART and other kinds, of course, 12-step programs are there. And that's where a peer recovery coach such as yourself might need to or want to point someone in a direction. So let me ask about that, because I know that you, as a peer recovery coach, then you searched for, I think, pathways to recovery, alternatives to AA, although it's not really alternative. Smart recovery is something in its own right, not just something that is not a 12-step program. I think that's an important point. But you started searching and you found Smart Recovery. Tell me about that.
And so this fledgling organization, Face It Together, was really set out to discover something, anything, because we really felt that almost everything was broken. And so described ourselves as disturbing innovators in the addiction field, if you will. So I was trained as a recovery coach. And what I found early on was that a fair number of people that came to see me and asked me for help, since we really had no skin in any game, we don't and didn't care how people got well at Face It Together. We just wanted to assist them in any way we could. I would say, what about 12-step meetings? They're great for people that had, alcohol, again, is very prevalent around here in South Dakota. What I would hear a lot, Luke, is, that's not for me. I've tried it. I know about it. I went, I did it. No, that's why I came here. And looking back and reflecting, of course, we had a lot of people come to Face It Together for help who had already experienced AA and didn't connect. That's why they were coming to us. So I was hitting this wall a lot where I was hoping to engage them with the 12-step community because we wanted to be partners. We just want to walk along with people. We were very, very open to anything in the community or the internet or whatever could help somebody. But I know support meetings are powerful, and peer support, self-help groups. So I Googled, there was SMART. It appeared to be legitimate, if you will. This is back in 2010 or 11 when I checked it out. It resonated with what we were doing. So I went to our leadership and simply said, what about Smart Recovery? Are we okay with it? And can we even go further? Can I train and host a Smart Recovery meeting? Because we didn't have one here in Sioux Falls. Leadership looked at it. It was science-based. It aligned with us. And they said, of course, go ahead. I trained and offered the first Smart Recovery meeting in South Dakota in July of 2012 at Face It Together.
Boy, that's a number of factors coming together and really lining up in order to have you become a facilitator and start that very first meeting. Besides the science basis, or what other ways does FIT? I know that's what you call the Face It Together program. How does that? How is that symmetrical to or similar to concepts and principles of Smart Recovery?
Well, first of all, it's non-confrontational. Come in, sit down, let's have a conversation about what's going on, and let's offer these clients some things that might resonate with them. Very, very open to multiple or original pathways, very, very science driven. So that was something that was perfectly aligned with SMART. Almost everything about Smart Recovery in a group setting if you wanted to just simplify it or kind of wrap your head around it, take all that and put it into a peer mode, because sometimes SMART's recovery meetings are not led by a peer, but take everything in SMART recovery and a little bit more and put it into a one-on-one peer interaction. And you've got Face It Together addiction management coaching. That's how we transformed into, from recovery coaching, we really became addiction management coaches.
You're listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. We're talking with Dave Jansa today. He's in South Dakota, beautiful Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Is that correct?
That's right.
And he is a Smart Recovery Facilitator, someone as a board member involved heavily with an organization called Face It Together, which is very similar in practices and principles with Smart Recovery, and really kind of a pioneer out there in South Dakota. You mentioned, no pun intended, you mentioned the first meeting in South Dakota, but didn't you also get involved with family and friends meeting out there?
I did. And to my recollection, Family and Friends was introduced around 2014. So I'm hosting Smart Recovery meetings. They're going really well. I think we'd expanded to a couple, 3 meetings in Sioux Falls. And I've got my head wrapped around my addictive behaviors and how to assist others with their addictive behaviors, with one exception, my son. That dynamic, that father-son, parent-child dynamic was lost on me. And looking back on it now, I know why. I was misinformed. I was misinformed by our culture in general and what to do with my son. Very, very painful experience for me and my wife and my son. But in 2014, as I'm facilitating Smart Recovery meetings, I hear about Smart Recovery Family and Friends, and they're going to branch off and start a new mutual aid support group similar to, or an alternative to, Al-Anon. And I thought, wow, that's great. I love SMART. I love everything they do. It sounds like something I could really use. Please send me a Family and Friends manual ASAP. I got it, and Luke, it literally transformed the way that I interacted with my son. And I found that the things I had been doing, like most people that I have had contact with over time, most of the things I've been doing, I kind of put it into the 4 top no-nos, if you will, that I was experiencing, that I was projecting. Tough love, allowing my son to just hit bottom. That's another phrase that our culture is in love with. Worried about whether I was enabling, wanting to make sure that I wasn't going to enable him, and all freaked out and worried about being codependent. When I learned that tough love is just confrontation,
and SMART being non-confrontational,
and SMART saying to me in the handbook, stop yelling at your kid. Stop. And I was yelling at him. I was trying to drive it into him, and I really felt empowered to do that by this tough love. What I call, I don't know, how do you describe tough love? It's just this belief that we have in our culture that it's a healthy thing to do, that we're supposed to do, and just allowing him to go out and just crash and burn and hit bottom, waiting for him to come groveling back to me to say, I'm ready for everything that you've been trying to tell me. Enabling is a classic. Enabling means helping in every other context in our world. Why would I not want to help my son? Now, there's good enabling and bad enabling. There's good help and bad help.
Right.
But to just not help, which is kind of the message that I was getting, I'll just speak for myself, that was not good. And then codependency is just, for those who might not know out there, it's just not grounded in science. It's just very confusing.
Yeah, it is a confusing concept. I was talking with someone about it, and they're saying you make someone else's feelings more important than your own. So you turn over that kind of your own identity or your own feelings. But I don't want to get into a long conversation about codependency. It's confusing. It's misunderstood. And although a lot's been written about it, I'm not sure it's really understandable. How about that?
Better from you than from me.
Okay. Well, so let's say we stay with your experience with family and friends, because I recently talked on a podcast about working with teens and young adults and how that can differ, how that the needs of that community of people, because they're people. Yes, they're younger people, but they are really, still in their own right individuals. And they have frames of reference. They have certain kinds of language. They have different things that make more sense to them. Is that also a part of, when you're a family or friend of someone, if they happen to be a teen or a young adult, does that take it into account, with family and friends?
Well, I think the family and friends, I almost wanted to call it a concept, but it's not a concept, that the science behind family and friends, which a lot of it was developed by Kraft, of course, Robert J. Myers and Kraft, works for any relationship between someone that is trying to assist a person that has addictive behaviors or addictions. It's just really good, solid stuff that works across the spectrum from
it. And I'm sorry, I should have stopped for a second. Let's remind people what CRAFT stands for, who may not be familiar. Community. I can't actually get the acronym correct myself. I know about it, but community reinforcement
and family training.
So it does recognize the dynamics of family and talks about that kind of community basis. Okay. Continue. You talked about, for anyone who with these tools and family and friends.
Right. And I apologize for throwing out an acronym there, and thanks for clearing that up. Yeah, CRAFT is just some great science that Smart Recovery uses and merged with, you might say, in making their family and friends program. It works across the spectrum because it's all about healthy communication and understanding what the other person is going through and getting yourself in a really good, healthy spot so that you're not so overwhelmed and burdened by all of the stigma and everything that goes around being a parent or being a wife or a partner of someone. There's a lot of stigma in that arena too. So it kind of clears the air and gives you some great foundational tools to lean on to get yourself feeling really stable and healthy, knowing where your boundaries are, and then you can interact with this person in your life. And usually that relationship is somewhat or very, very broken, and you can start to repair it. And the way that you do that is by demonstrating or leading. So now we're talking about, rather than sitting on the side and letting them hit bottom, if they want to, if the loved one or the parent or whatever wants to take the lead, CRAFT says go for it. Get out there and show them that you are now willing to have salient, healthy, non-confrontational conversations with them. And normally, the beautiful thing is, Lou, most of the time they respond positively to the new, healthier you.
Yeah. And that's the key right there. Then there's something to build upon. There's something to grow from.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned stigma. I think in what I've talked to a lot of people about is this labeling of people who have substance misuse disorders, calling them things like alcoholics, calling them things like addicts, talking about them, making bad choices and that they are somehow less than. Now, if a person is identifying and okay with labels like that, that's one thing. But I think teens and young adults, if they feel labeled, they're going to have a response. I mean, I know, just quote, normal teens don't like being put in a box, and they're developing their identity. They don't like being told things. Is that part of it as well?
Almost no one likes to be labeled. And again, if labeling yourself empowers you, that's great. But to put a label on someone, especially in this arena of addiction, because there are so many hurtful labels, from the wino to the junkie to and they just go on and on and on and on. And in the loved one arena, that's the way I was referred to family and friends at Face It Together, an enabler or a codependent.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
What a horrible label, especially in that confusing arena that we
That's
already
right.
covered. I mean, to have that label stuck on you equally as unhelpful.
Yeah, it can be even harmful. It can be
Yeah,
harmful
absolutely.
and certainly not helpful. But you're listening. That was Dave Jansa. He's a smart recovery facilitator, a board member of an organization, Face It Together in South Dakota. Is that actually also in other states, or is Face It Together just in South Dakota?
So we have brick and mortar in Colorado as well. But with COVID, and even before COVID, we were doing coaching over the phone and through Zoom. And I think we were at 15 or 16 states we have expanded to. And I think now we're up to close to 40 states
Okay.
doing a lot of work over Zoom. If I might put in a plug for Face It Together, one of the most innovative tools that Face It Together came up with was something called the Recovery Capital Index. And we actually took this index score, this series of questions that we asked every client, and took it and had it validated. We, like SMART, are very, very, very bound to scientific principles. So what we developed to Face It Together was a validated tool to measure addiction wellness called the Recovery Capital Index. What a great tool for a one-on-one peer addiction management coach to have at his side.
Is it kind of a scorecard or a sense of like, okay, how am I doing? Can I take some lesson from how I'm doing, take some pride in how I'm doing?
Absolutely. It measures physical, mental, spiritual, and self-determination characteristics in everyone. We get a baseline on them when they come in. And then every 30 days through our interactions, we see if they're getting better. Mm-hmm. And to be able to use those questions as a tool, to be able to use those scores as an indicator of where someone might be struggling or succeeding, was a great, just a really solid piece of tooling, again, that Face It Together came up with, that was a part of, I think, virtually every client that we had. We never, again, non-confrontational, we wouldn't require them to take it, but virtually everyone did.
Recognizing growth. I mean,
Yes.
That's important, not just and sometimes with 12-step programs, there can be a emphasis on a relapse. Oh boy, you have to go back to square one. You have to start over. You really did something wrong. Bill Greer, the board president of SMART, talks about, and I'm not sure if it's original to him or he got it somewhere else, but the fact that if you're driving from, New York to Los Angeles and you get a flat tire in Chicago, you're not going to turn around and start again in New York. You're going to change the tire and keep moving.
That is such a great example. I've used that so many times. People just go, yes, of course.
I know. Well, because hopefully we don't have multiple flat tires, but most of us can relate to having a flat tire at some point or knowing someone. How about that?
Exactly.
So we talked about the family and friends. We talked about your son's struggles. How are things today with your son?
Much, much better. And I owe most of that to Smart Recovery and what family and friends did for me and for my wife. Again, you hear people in the recovery world talk about how the 12 steps are a guide for life, not just for addiction wellness, but man, they just apply to your life in general. So do the tools in Smart Family and Friends. They apply to other relationships that we have with other people. And yes, better. My son is better and we are better. And what I did then with the family and friends knowledge that I gained was, and again, here we are with these disturbing innovators back at Face It Together, who always said, this is a family issue most of the time. This is not addiction, affects other people deeply. But we really didn't know what to do with them. We just kind of would always pat them on the back and say, it sucks to be you. And let's try to get the person that you're concerned about here or into treatment or something. And then we'd send them out the door. I started sharing my experiences with my son and what I learned in Smart Family and Friends with the family members that were coming in to face it together. And long story short, I was telling leadership with about the amazing interactions, positive interactions I was having with these loved ones. And they said, well, let's develop something so that we can help them out in a very, very structured way, like we're doing with people with addictive behaviors. And that was what we call our loved one program was born from, basically born from what I learned and my lived experience in transforming from old school thought to Smart Family and Friends way of doing things. And then sharing that one-on-one in a peer relationship with other people coming through the door. Very powerful program.
Yeah, and that's something of a practical nature. I mean, it's one thing to be empathetic. It's one thing to identify with those who are struggling, but to say, here, look, this is what I've done. These are the kinds of things that I know about. And that if you do these things, there's a chance, there's no guarantees in life, but there's a chance that you'll have better outcomes. You'll have better relationships, better communication. You talked about communication. And that's what is key, I think, and Smart Recovery does so well, is having practical applications, tools to use.
And then started a Smart Family and Friends meeting and facilitated it and was able to tell the people that were coming to face it together, come also to the Smart Family and Friends meeting, get a handbook, learn from others that are struggling with the same thing that you are. And again, just like any other self-help group, grab the power that's in that room with this great program, and let's see if we can help ourselves get through this problem.
Yeah, get through this problem and live a life beyond addiction.
Yes.
You know, one that Smart uses as a kind of a shorthand, a tagline, is that we are searching for that. We're searching for something more and a life that's healthy and balanced and filled with, positive relationships. I mean, isn't that what it is all about?
It absolutely is. And I love everything about Smart Recovery. It's just a program that I stumbled on, that I resonated with, that I am passionate about. I'm passionate about Face It Together too. So I was just a really lucky guy who was given the opportunity to do something that it was of interest to him, helping other people with addictive behaviors, have this great organization around me, have them realize that Smart Recovery was a great partner, you might say, with us, and then to have family and friends come along and be able to share that with other family members, develop a program around it. Again, a very lucky guy with a lot of great.
Well, I'd say you also had, you took action. You took action. It wasn't enough to know about it. You decided that I want to do something with this. I want to be part of the solution. If that's not too much of a cliche, I want to be part of how people are getting well. Exactly. And that's and as a byproduct, of course, you benefited too. Anything else, Dave, as we're kind of wrapping up here? Anything else about Face It Together or your involvement with family and friends that you'd like to share with the audience?
I would tell your audience that if they're tuning in here looking for help with a family member, or if they're struggling with their own addictive behaviors, consider how your family member is either helping you or trying to help you, but not helping you. In a nutshell, the family component, I believe, is the diamond in the rough that will be the largest contributor as we turn the corner in dealing with addictive behaviors. The family has been left aside. They've been coached to stay aside, and that's not necessarily the best thing to do. In fact, oftentimes it's not. So if you have addictive behaviors and you're listening, encourage your family member or a loved one, whatever, to engage with Smart Family and Friends, check them out, or call Face It Together. And if you are a family member who's struggling with someone in your life that has addictive behaviors, learn about the tools that Smart Recovery Family and Friends has to offer you. Don't sit on the sidelines and just wait.
Great advice. Great summary, Dave. I really appreciate that. spoken so well. I think our audience members can really take heart from that, and take some resolve and take some action. So that's what's very, very important. You've been listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. We've been talking with Dave Jansa. He's a Smart Recovery Facilitator. He has lived experience with the Family and Friends program, and he is also a board member for an organization called Face It Together. Dave, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Luke. I really enjoyed it.
It's your host, Luke Frazier. Until next time on the Smart Recovery Podcast, stay healthy and stay connected.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Recovery Podcast. Be sure to visit smartrecovery.org, where you can subscribe to our e-newsletter and check out additional podcasts, blogs, videos, and more. If you found today's podcast interesting and helpful, we encourage you to share it with others. You can also find information about SMART Facilitator training and other ways to participate in our important work. To help us continue to provide recovery support to all the individuals who need us, please consider making a tax-deductible donation at smartrecovery.org/donation, or simply click the donate button on our homepage. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next Smart Recovery Podcast. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.